Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part 4 of our legal research series, Researching State and Federal Regulations. Our presenter today is Rebekah Maxwell. She is the Associate Director for Library Operations at the University of South Carolina Law Library. Before we begin, I just want to discuss some webinar norms and technical aspects. We ask that all attendees mute their microphones. We ask that all attendees turn off their video camera in order to save on bandwidth. If you have any questions or technical problems, please ask using the chat box. To make the screen of the PowerPoint bigger, you may click on Hide Everyone. You can also zoom in or out of the PowerPoint screen. You can also take screenshots of the PowerPoint screen. After the webinar, a link to the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be sent out to all registered participants.
Hello, everybody. This is Rebekah. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking an interest in my presentation. Let me start sharing the screen and I will try to get my PowerPoint underway. And we are talking today about state and federal regulations. Regulations are one of the three sources of primary law in any state and in the federal government. You've already heard about the legislative branch. The executive branch is where the regulations come from. The executive branch enforce and implement the laws that the legislature makes, and the way they do that is through regulations. And you may hear the terminology used interchangeably, rules and regulations. First, we're going to look at state regulations, focusing on South Carolina because that's where we are, and that's where the majority of our questions at the reference desk will probably come from. What are South Carolina regulations? When the legislature passes a law, they designate an existing state agency or create a new agency to enforce and implement that law. And to be able to do that, it gives the state agency the duty and responsibility to write rules and regulations. An agency just doesn't haul off and decide to create regulations. It always has to have a grant of authority from the legislature. Statutes and regulations work together. And what makes them useful to us is regulations lots of times can provide a level of detail and answer questions that statutes don't. Regulations are a source of primary law, just as statutes are and as cases are. South Carolina regulations in print are published as part of the South Carolina Code set, and they're indexed in the same index with the South Carolina Code and court rules. There are annotations following the text of a regulation that add a lot of interesting information that a researcher might find useful. The beauty of an annotated code is it gives a nice little grab bag of extra sources, with the expectation that if you're interested in this regulation or this statute, you might also be interested in some of these other pieces of information. And chances are we are going to be interested. You can find South Carolina regulations on the web for free using the state legislature's website. This is the unofficial and unannotated version. The official version is the print that comes with the South Carolina Code set. Lots of people may have this in their library. Some of the public libraries have them, and a lot of the academic libraries do. But if you don't, you can still get to the regulations for free on the web going to the state legislature's website. And there are some search options there that allow you to search by citation if you know it, browse regulations by chapter, and search the regulations by keyword. And over here, there's a whole lot of stuff you can do from the State House website for free. And there is a link here for the Code of Regulations. An agency's regulations may be posted on its website. Lots of times it is. They are. The South Carolina Legislature's website provides an alphabetical listing of links to South Carolina state agency websites. So it's kind of a shortcut if you want to get to an agency or try to figure out what sort of agencies are even out there. this is a good starting point, and you can get there from the State House website. Here is a question that we might get that would involve state regulations. Pretend a patron comes into your library and is concerned about the behavior of their child's school bus driver and wants to know if there are any qualifications that bus drivers have to have. So how do we get started on this? First, we would check for statutes on the subject. Then we would identify the agency that might be in charge of any regulations, and then check the regulations from the agency on the subject. We can generally use the statutes to identify the relevant agency. The third part of this webinar series shows how to find the statutes, and I apologize for not having the link in here. In Title 59, Chapter 67, if we went to the State House website, we can find statutes related to the transportation of school children. And we can start with the Code of Laws on the General Assembly's website. Y'all have seen this before, but this is a great catch-all, one-stop shop place for primary sources in South Carolina. So to get to the Code of Laws, the link is right above the one for the Code of Regulations. And also notice, here's a link over here on the left-hand sidebar for state agency websites. That's one of the screens we just visited in the PowerPoint. So when we get to the title page for the statutes on the website, we find that Title 59 is the education title. And if we clicked the education title and opened up all the chapters, we would find that Chapter 67 dealt with the transportation of pupils and school buses. Notice we have gotten this far so far by browsing, so it is possible, if you've got a general concept, to browse your way to something relevant just by using the tables of contents for the titles themselves in the South Carolina Code and for the chapters within the titles. And here we have the statute that grants authority to the State Board of Education to make regulations having to do with the transportation of pupils and school buses. And way down here at the bottom is a line that says any person operating a school bus under contract with the school district who fails to comply with any regulations shall be guilty of a breach of contract and can get fired. So that tips us off that there are regulations, there are statutes, and there are regulations that deal with bus drivers and the bus system in general. So the legislature's grant of authority is what we just found in Title 59, Chapter 67, Section 20. That's how we read this, the citation for that statute. Now that we know how the granting of authority works, we can find the regulations on the General Assembly's website. And we go back to the General Assembly's website to the Code of Regulations. When we get inside, we will find that in the regulations, Chapter 43 deals with the State Board of Education. Notice that we have titles in the statutes and we have chapters in the regulations. So the whole of Article 5 deals with transportation regulations, and the whole of Chapter 43, Section 80, this is one regulation and it is a big long one, deals with the operation of public student transportation services. And it includes regulations for the transport of students, including the qualification and training of bus drivers. The citation for this regulation is written SC Code Annotated, Regs 43-80. 43 is the chapter. South Carolina regulations will have chapters while statutes have titles. 80 is the section number within the chapter. When we access the South Carolina regulations through the General Assembly's website, we will be opening a great big Word or PDF document that contains the whole chapter. So it'll be really long, and close reading, patience, determination, and maybe a little controlled find might be required. So what's in Regulation 4380? On the previous screen, we just had a glimpse of a very small piece of it, but it's a very long regulation involving operation of a school district's bus system. If we scroll down through the reg, we would find information containing to a lot of qualifications and processes that a bus driver candidate had to go through before being allowed to drive a school bus, including a whole certification process, the requirement for the Board of Education to see that person's driving record and evaluate it. The person has to have a background check, a physical exam, a training program, a road skills examination, and is also subject to substance abuse testing. So they don't let just anybody drive a school bus. The process is overseen and regulated. There's more than one way generally to get to a legal source or a source of any kind. We could have gone about this in other ways, including conducting a Google search to get to the agency website, or accessing through the General Assembly's state agency link. But if we were going to Google, we know the agency involved is the South Carolina Department of Education, and we can run a search query that might look something like this. And everybody can generally come up with their own search queries, but this is one that I know works. I have a plus sign to tell Google this is a phrase I need to be in there. And I put it in a phrase just so in quotes so it'll hang together. So I got plus phrase SC Department of Education space plus phrase school bus drivers. And when I tell the Google that, the Google gives me back this website, the Department of Education's transportation page. And there's lots of good information here: student transportation general information, school bus fleet management, student transportation routing and safety. There's a lot involved here. And underneath the banner that says student transportation general information is a link for statutes, policies, and etc. And the etc. is going to include regulations. But an agency website is a lovely place to have this stuff gathered all up for us. So we could have gone to the state website, the agency website first, or we could have gone to the General Assembly website first, or we could have Googled it to get some sense of direction if we weren't quite sure how to get somewhere. When we drill down into the Statutes and Policies link from the transportation page, we find lots of different useful things, including student transportation regulations. But wait, there's more. We will visit this at the end, but I'm saving all of the online exploration for when we get done with the PowerPoint. But Terry Conroy has put up and maintains the Circuit Riders Research Guide, which has a lot more detail on researching state regulations. This was the quick and dirty, if you will, but there are lots more details and lots more information on the Circuit Riders website. Moving along to federal regulations, we see the same processes at work in the federal government as we have experienced in the state government. Federal agencies issue rules and regulations to implement and enforce federal laws just like the state agencies do. These rules and regulations are published by the agency and subject in the Code of Federal Regulations. There's a great big set of print books, and there is also a great big set of federal regulations online. And the codified federal regulations are called the Code of Federal Regulations, otherwise known as the CFR. Finding regs in print is relatively easy if you have access to a print Code of Federal Regulations. Not everybody does. Any federal depository library can get it. if you've got a print code of federal regulations, you can find regs by citation if you know the citation. Sometimes you might find it in a secondary source or a document, or somebody just tells you. You can find it in lots of times in annotations to statutes in an annotated U.S. code. You can browse the table of contents in individual regulatory volumes, or you could use the subject index that comes with the CFR. If you don't have a print CFR, that's okay. You and your patrons can find federal regulations online at the website of the U.S. Government Printing Office, which is govinfo.gov. And here is their landing page. And there is an A to Z title list that will let you browse documents in alphabetical order. This thing goes for miles because the GPO goes for miles, lots and lots and lots of titles and publications from the federal government. Lots of search options. Here is what the A to Z title list shows us. We could also browse from the GovInfo page, but I find the A to Z title list very easy to use, and it will let you link to anything that you find in the list and lets you jump around in the alphabet by using the alphabet buttons at the top. And the Code of Federal Regulations is posted back to 1996. So if people come in looking for older regs, there's a version online, at least back to 1996. There's current content, there's some archival content, and you can browse and click the little plus sign next to the years to open up the offerings for the CFR for that particular year. There is also an electronic CFR. What you're getting when you're here are PDF documents of the print. Titles 1 through 16 are revised as of January 1. Titles 17 through 27 are revised in April. Titles 28 through 41 are revised in July, and titles 42 through 50 are revised in October. The whole CFR is too big to do at one time, so they chop it up into 4 blocks and revise it in sections, staggered throughout the year, and by the end of the year, everything is renewed and it starts over. The eCFR is updated a lot quicker because this is electronic content and they don't have to wait on the publication of print volumes to be able to update it. It's not official, but it's very convenient and it's much more timely than the print, even if the print is delivered in an electronic format. The print CFR won't be nearly as updated online or in print as will the eCFR, so that is an option for newer information. Federal agency websites can also be great resources for finding links to the federal laws they enforce and the regulations they issue to do that. And here is the USA.gov page, which will let you link to government agencies or search by topic if you're not sure which agency handles which subject matter. So here is our second sample reference question. Pretend a patron comes into your library and says, I'm looking for information that will help me figure out whether I can get supplemental security income benefits for my grandchildren who live with me. Part 3 of this webinar series features a federal statute, Title 42 of the U.S. Code, Section 1382C. And this section is the definition statute for purposes of determining SSI benefits. And we can use this statute as a starting point on govinfo.gov to find more related statutes. We also need to find the federal regulations about SSI benefits. We'll need to know what federal agency is in charge of making the regulations too. It's not a bad idea sometimes to start off with a Google search and a search for supplemental security income regulations can help us find that. This search, which is pretty much just like you might be thinking of the subject matter, leads us to the Social Security Administration, which administers the SSI program. So Google is a good way to find a lead for which agency handles what. If you're not sure already, and if you don't want to browse all of the agencies available on the USA.gov site, sometimes it'll be sort of intuitive. Like you can imagine school buses would have to do with the Board of Education. SSI, you may or may not think Social Security right away. And in the instances where it's not obvious, sometimes Google can help you identify the agency. If we follow the first link in our Google search, we find that the regulations are in Title 20 of the Code of Federal Regulations in Part 416 and its various sections, denoted by decimal points. So here is Title 20. This is what the citation means, Title 20 of the CFR. Part 416, in this case it's decimal, section 200-2203. Here's another piece in Title 20 of the CFR, Part 416, sections 401 through 435, and Title 20 of the CFR in Part 416, sections 420 and 421. This is a good way to narrow it down. We could get there the same way in an index if we had the print CFR. But if you don't, there are ways to get to it that are not hugely burdensome. And when we click the link to the first entry that we are given on the agency website, we can go into the regulations themselves. And one of the cool things about the SSA site is it hot links other regulations. It starts off with the introduction, and then there are lots of other sections that our patron would want to check out to get the whole picture. There are lots and lots of regulations. Chances are no one regulation is going to answer somebody's question. Most federal questions are complicated and have lots of moving parts. So the patron will probably want to look at all of the related statutes and all the related regulations, not just the first one they find as an access point. We can also use the regulations on GovInfo, but it's probably easier to use them from the SSA site. Notice the options that we have when we get, here is an image of the sort of things that we would if we went to GovInfo for this title and these sections. You get a PDF option and an XML option. If you are on the SSA site, this is pretty much an HTML option, and you can move around in the documents a whole lot easier and probably access them more comfortably. GovInfo is good for lots of things, but most of its PDFs are large and load slowly, and it may be more beneficial to do something a little more seamless from the SSA site. Regulations can be numerous and complicated, and luckily for our patron, the SSA site has a page just for information related to SSI benefits for children and grandchildren, including a PDF on supplemental security income, a link for understanding SSI for children, and lots of other good information. This is one of their public-facing pages. The agencies know that their information can be overwhelming for folks who are just coming to the subject matter, and a page like this can help get a patron started with a lot less frustration, and possibly a lot fewer questions for us on what does this mean, which is not anything we can tell people, even if we knew, because of the unauthorized practice of law issue. Government agencies are wonderful for giving contact information. They can give extra help for patrons in a direct sense and librarians in an indirect sense, because we can't interpret statutes and regulations for our patrons, but the agencies can. There will always be contact information on the agency website so the patrons can reach out if they have questions or need more information. Agencies can answer questions that we can't. So thanks for taking the tour. I will plug the Circuit Riders website once again because there are lots of pages there dealing with federal regulations as well as state regulations. Now, I open the floor for questions if you got any. While I'm waiting for questions, I want to show you a few things live on the South Carolina Legislature's website. It works pretty much like the screens in the PowerPoint would make you think it worked. Here is the Code of Regulations. Here's the South Carolina Code of Laws. Over here is the link to the state agency websites. So once we get into the Code of Regulations, we can browse. And don't be disturbed by this disclaimer here. It is merely warning you that this is for your convenience. It's not official, and the print is the one that's official. We've got lots of different chapters with lots of different subjects, and you have a Word option or a PDF option. These are going to be big, long documents. So it may take a little while to load, and it may take a little while to sift through, but here you have your regulations for free without much trouble to find. You've got a link here to state agency websites, and they're alphabetical. They try to give you some categories that seem to be what people are most interested in, or you can browse on your own. GovInfo is a little bit clunky, but again, it's free, and it's federal documents that you don't have to look up and print. And when we click into the AZ title list, we can go to the Code of Federal Regulations, 1996 to present, and when we turn on the functionality for 2020, what we're seeing are the volumes that were revised in January. The ones that have been revised in April haven't been posted yet, which means if we are looking for information that hasn't been revised or posted in this calendar year, we'll have to go to the previous year. If it's anything through Titles 1 through 15, we can get them from the 2020 page or the 2020 link. If it's anything after Title 15, we're going to need to go back to 2019. And if you find a print CFR, you will find 2 years mixed in together on the shelf as the revision process goes along. So don't be disturbed if that happens. If you want to skip to the eCFR and get updates in a more timely manner, notice this is current as of May 26th. So this is only 2 days behind. It's not official, but if you want to find out what the regulations say faster than it's going to post waiting on the print revisions, here's your place to go. And if you're not sure which federal agency handles which subject matter, you can go and poke around on usa.gov and use the government agencies and elected officials link or the all topics and services link. And I can't leave without showing you the Circuit Riders LibGuide available from the library's page at the URL that's in the PowerPoint. There's lots of good information here. You may have already had occasion to use it, but the South Carolina regs and the federal regs sections are hot off the press. Terry just updated them and they're waiting for you. Anybody got any questions? Well, I thank you very much for joining me. You've been a great audience.
Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Our next webinar, part 5 of the legal research series, Researching State and Federal Cases, Court Rules and Forms, will be on June 11th at 2 o'clock. We really look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, and thank you so much, Rebekah. This was wonderful. There's so much great information that we learned today. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank y'all for asking me.